Good evening, everyone. We're excited to welcome you tonight to this wonderful conversation and dialogue from the Hartford Seminary. On behalf of our president, Dr. Joel Lohr, and the faculty and staff, we are excited to have you join with us tonight. I'm excited tonight to be in great company, and with me tonight, my colleague and good friend, Dr. M.T. Winter, who is pushing along and still working harder in her retirement status as emeritus faculty that she did when she was working full time. And we're excited to have this conversation and to host this time together. So grateful to Susan Schomburg and Stephen Rivera, who will be backing us up on technical support tonight. I want to invite you to be in dialogue with us. This is not simply a monologue. We also want to be conversing with you. So in the chat section, I hope you will put questions down that you would like to have the panelists seek to answer after they give their presentations. So please use the chat box to offer questions to us. This is a very great time to have this dialogue as we're in the last few days of Black History Month, and it's a wonderful time to be in dialogue. Women's Leadership Institute has always been involved with Black Ministries Program from our inception. BMP began, and there were two faculty persons who were involved who are still active today. And that would be M.T. Winter, who was the first teacher in BMP who taught worship and spirituality. And you could only imagine what that looked like. Here was this beautiful Catholic nun teaching a group of African-American females and males about worship and praise. But boy, the report is the Spirit of the Lord moved in, and they had a beautiful time. And the other was our first speaker, Dr. Alvan Johnson. And I am excited to be in their presence. Dr. Barbara Headley, who is with us as well tonight, who is former part of our faculty here at Hartford Seminary. So this is going to be a great dialogue. So let me just kind of set the stage, and then I'm going to ask them to come in order and speak to us and share with us. 2020 was a very difficult year because we experienced the pandemic. Many of us who are in pastoral ministry were unable to gather our congregations together, so that there has been very little in-person contact with members of our churches. During this entire year, we were all learning how to live in the midst of a pandemic. We were learning how to survive, learning social distancing, learning masking, learning how to be community without being physically connected. And just as we were trying to get that down, just as we were dealing with the number of sicknesses, the number of deaths, the contagion of the virus of COVID-19, suddenly we were all thrust into a nightmare that lasted 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And that was the cold-blooded murder of George Floyd. That murder in the middle of the street by an officer who kneeled on his throat, who actually took him out of here with his knee on his body, who took him from this life. All of us witnessed it, and we were all shocked. But what we really were witnessing was a public display of what had been happening behind the scenes. All along, there have been all kinds of issues that have never come to light that are coming to light now. They were anecdotal stories. They were in small newspapers. They were in the Black newsprint. They were in small enclaves, and people knew what was going on. They knew what was happening. And even stories now, like the story of Elijah McClain, who is just really coming to the forefront, where a young man who was just an introvert and quiet was killed because he looked different, given a dose of ketamine on the street, on the ground, and took his life. He had no crime. He was not being pulled aside because he did anything wrong. He was pulled aside because he looked different, because he acted quiet, a polite, quiet soul. Brianna Taylor, the multiple bullets that went through her home that took her life. We want to say their names, Sandra Bland. We want to say their names and we want to remember them. But we really recognize that this summer became a summer of reckoning. And the reckoning came as people took the street, not only from in this country, but all over the world. And people said no more. And people began to hold one another accountable, not only for not being racist, but accountable to start thinking about what it meant to be anti-racist. Not only for not being a bigot, but how to hold bigots accountable for their bigotry in public that would be laughed at in the buffoonery and conversations that would go on by the water cooler. We're in a different season. And now we are gathered now to think about what is our dream going forward? Where have we been? What is the dream? And what do we think we can make it of it going forward now? Now in 2021, as we look at the dream that Martin had, which was the dream of a civil rights movement, the same dream that was in the heart of Malcolm X, the same dream that was in the heart of others who were hard workers in the cause for freedom. What is the dream and what can the future look like? And with that background, I want to offer to you tonight two wonderful speakers who will share with us. The first one, neither of them need any introduction to certain communities. Dr. Alvan Johnson is a preacher, teacher par excellence. He pastored for over 29 years in Bloomfield at the Bethel AME Church. He has over 45 years of pastoral experience. He has his undergraduate degree from UMass, a degree from BU, and another degree, a doctorate from BU as well. He is a teacher, preacher, former elder. He's now retired, but he works harder like MT in retirement than he did when he was pastoring full time. And I want to welcome him as our opening speaker. And then I'm going to come back and introduce Dr. Headley. But right now, I want you, if you will, put your screens on speaker view. So we will only look exclusively at Dr. Johnson, and he's going to spend a moment and he's going to share with us his thoughts on the dream. Please go right ahead. Start writing in the chat your questions, start writing in your statements. We'll filter them and we're going to bring them in and use them as part of our dialogue tonight. MT, is there anything you want to say before Dr. Alvan starts? Okay, thank you very much. Let's get it started. Dr. Johnson, you have the floor.
First and foremost, I would like to greet each and every one in the name of all that is good and holy, and to ask God's richest blessings upon each and every one of you. I want to salute Dr. Watts because he is my dean in the Black Ministries program, and he is a sterling and shining light that I am honored and pleasure to do ministry with. 40 plus years, the Reverend, Dr. Miriam Teresa Winter. We've been pastoring and teaching and working at Hartford Seminary for these many years. And I'm so very happy to be with you this evening. And the Reverend Dr. Headley, she's what I call a double exposure, you see, because she exposes the finest that there is in academic and intellectual preparation. But on the other hand, she is very extremely powerful in her spiritual delivery, and what I consider to be an outstanding role model for Christian ministers and necessary for these days and these times. So, and I salute you. I hadn't seen it since I had a chance to retire, but I'm more than happy to be included with such august and erudite scholars and spiritual leaders. Thank you very much. The other thing that I really wanted to preface my remarks by saying that I'm also glad to be included because in 1963, the hot sweltering day in August, I was exactly 70 feet away from Martin Luther King, and I heard the I Have a Dream speech in person. So now coming full circle to talk about the dream is really it's an honor, and I am absolutely humbled by it. I just have three things to say very briefly as I personally go forward from here. That I have a great deal of hope that we can move closer to the fulfillment of that dream through interreligious understanding. I have been studying the at least 9, and now I'm working on the 10th of the world's greatest religions, the most powerful and influential religions, and each and every one of them have a commitment to justice, and we share that in common. And I am excited about its potential. I sit on the board of directors for the Connecticut Council for Interreligious Understanding, and Dr. Lohr is on the council's board as well. And serving with him, he is a sterling figure, a very learned and articulate, yet passionate spiritual leader. And I certainly appreciate him. What I'm learning is that every one of the world's major religions has the equivalent, a saying, the equivalent that articulates to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And when we begin to glean and hone in on what we hold in common, then we can build a mighty force for justice. If the Sikhs and the Hindus and the Baha'i and the Unitarian Universalists and all of the religions that we are looking at, I really have hope that if we come together and exacerbate our quest for justice, to maximize it, that I look for hope. I think that we can make a significant difference, that we can create a mighty army based on not race or not in individual denomination, but for everybody who can be united around the cause for justice. And in one sense, that would be an extension of Dr. King's model, because he brought Native Americans and Appalachian whites and Black and Jews. He brought together a wide variety of people and forged them together and moved forward. They had some legislation passed, and unfortunately, his life was snuffed out because he was getting ready to make a financial and economic impact with a coalition of people. And so I really think that us forging together with people who love justice and who love the concept of equality and egalitarianism, that crosses all kinds of lines, that crosses racial lines, that crosses gender, that crosses many of the barriers that are used to separate us simply because we hold that in common. And I'm going to spend an inordinate amount of my time working on that agenda and seeing what I can do to help to bring about as much justice as I can by building a huge coalition of allies across and interreligious lines. Secondly, I am encouraged about the dream coming true, and I'm hoping that as I look at the demographics of the Black Lives Matter movement, We look at the demographics. We look at who was in the street. We saw Asian and Latinx Americans and blacks and whites and youth and adults. We was a really wide variety of people moving, striking a blow for justice. And that demographic, and I want to see, because I'm hoping and trusting that once the pandemic is conquered, and it will be, really hoping and trusting that it will be very, very soon, to see the resurgence of that kind of activity with people singing together and really being able to unify in person. I think that I'm looking forward to see where Black Lives Matter point to, where it goes. And I'm very, very hopeful about that. And I don't have any problem, no problem whatsoever, Dr. Watts, in following the leadership of those Black women. And then we take a look at Washington, D.C. and Atlanta and Chicago. The sisters are really doing an outstanding job of providing leadership. And I know that they're going to help us to go where we need to go. In light of that, and as a result, an offshoot of the Black Lives Matter movement here in Connecticut, a superb law calling for accountability amongst the police is on our books. It's there. Of course, it's still at this point meeting resistance, but it does hold police officers accountable. And I'm hoping and trusting they will spring up all over the nation. That this, hopefully ours might be the model, but even if it morphs and becomes even stronger, that I'm looking for the nation, I'm looking forward to it adopting a national standard of accountability for the police. Lastly, I just wanted to say that I'm excited about the amount of people uh, calling for anti-racism training. It's really all over the country. I mean, and people are using Kendi's book. They're using uh, Joshi, White Christian Privilege. There are several books that deal with the problem. And in my wildest imagination, and you know that can run wild at times, I'm looking for the gradual, I don't think it will ever go away, but I'm looking at the withering of the notion of white supremacy. I think what we saw on January the 6th was a dying, gasping of people who are fearful because they have privilege and they see themselves losing that privilege and they want to hold on to it at all costs, but they will not win. That idea will suffer a very slow yet systematic demise. And I'll tell you, I just believe that there are entirely too many opponents to that notion. And I'm looking for white supremacy to fade on into the background, one way or another. So I'm looking forward to an interreligious approach to creating more justice. And everybody knows there's no silver bullet out here, no one thing, but I certainly want to invest a great deal of time in um, an interreligious understanding. I also am anxious to see the continuation and increase in the Black Lives Matter activity. And I also have hope in the police accountability legislation and anti-racism training occurring all over the country. So thank you. And that's what I look for in the future of the dream.
Very powerful. Thank you so much, Doc. A great
You
job.
just
I appreciate you and articulating that for us. Um, I'm excited about your words, and I know that there already a question in the panel in the chat about what does it mean to be anti-racist. So I want to make sure we hold that as a question to come up when we enter into the question section in just a few moments, because anti-racism has a particular meaning, and so what does it mean? And I think that that's a great question to ask, particularly given now where there are a lot of people who are, I think, just coming to consciousness of their own biases, of their own privileges. They don't even realize they have them, but they are now becoming more aware of it. And so it'd be a great time to have that dialogue. So thank you very much. I want to introduce our second speaker here tonight, panelist, the Reverend Dr. Barbara Headley. The Reverend Dr. Headley is currently the pastor of Zion Community Baptist Church in Springfield, and she is a preacher, teacher par excellence. She has multiple years in ministry, and as a matter of fact, she has studied with us. She actually has her D-Min from Harvard Seminary, and it is so great to have her with us tonight. She is a preacher. She's a powerful teacher and a lecturer and a gifted person of God. We just had her speak for us a few days ago at our ministry, and the congregation is still delighting and speaking highly over that ministry. So I want to introduce to you and to welcome her now. I said she's at Zion Community Baptist Church in Springfield, Mass. And here's their pastor and our friend, the Reverend Dr. Barbara Headley.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation to be here tonight from the seminary, from Dr. Watts and MT, to share with old colleagues during this occasion of Black History. And just to reconnect with the seminary, Ben mentioned that I have a long ministerial history going on about 36 years, but 7 of those years were at Hartford Seminary as first as associate dean and then director of degree programs, as the young people say back in the day, in the late 80s and 90s, which brought me to Connecticut from New York. And so I've been able to watch down through the years as my ministry went on to do other things, how the seminary continued to evolve and hold true to itself, to the unusual way in which it approached theological education. And now its time has come, and it is truly a pioneer in approaching some of the theological issues of the day. And so I'm glad to be with you guys tonight, definitely. I just want to say a few things, and I try to write things down so I can stay focused, and just to share some things around the fact that we're celebrating Black History this, as we always do in this month of February, but also in light of what we are experiencing, the pandemic, but also the pandemic of injustice that has been revealed to others, but understood always in some communities, particularly people of the African diaspora living and existing in this country. I have, as a local Black clergy person, been speaking during Black History observances and Dr. King's birthday about his dream for several years now, about his dream that he shared so elegantly during the March on Washington in '63. It has been quoted now for over 58 years, and rightfully so, for it was one of his most notable speeches that stirred the hearts and the imaginations of Americans. It was a dream during a time when the fight for justice, equality, and freedom were the highest aspirations of people who had come to be in de facto slavery in America in the 20th century. We all remember Dr. King speaking in the challenging words of political and social powers of the day as he stood there in front of the monument. bear with me as I share with you some of those words just to stir our minds about what the dream was stated almost 58 years ago. He said these words: 50 years ago, an American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of weltering injustice. It came as a joyous outbreak to end the long night of their captivities. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. So we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise to all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It was indeed the essence of the dream that Dr. King expressed to us: the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the right to sit anywhere in a public bus or any public accommodations. But I would venture to say that the perimeters of the dream have out of necessity expanded. He quoted 100 years where there had not been any real change to the oppression of Africans in this land. But it's more than 100 years now. And I believe that his dream has been forced to expand, to be more holistic and inclusive to the aspirations of so many who are oppressed here in America. I believe that Dr. King was expanding his dream even before he died. I think many people believe that as he began to use a critical analysis of the social conditions in America and see how the political maneuverings of an empire was beginning to spread and to have influence, when he began to speak about the Vietnam War, many people felt that his fate was surely sealed then. They would tolerate him possibly to talk about the Black condition, but now he was messing in other things that they did not think was his to do. But I think it was Dr. King, even in those years in 1968, he began to see that what he had begun to understand was a Black or the Negro man's condition had more tentacles and more understanding and was more far-reaching. When he began to deal with the injustices in the North and began to see the apathy of African Americans in the North and begin to see the kinds of things, racism in its face, different from the South, but present in the North, I believe he began to see some things. And I believe if he had lived, his dream would have expanded in ways that we could have not even comprehended 58 years ago. It's been those many long years, and we indeed, as a people, have experienced some gains. There have been some maneuvering in the framework and the structure of white supremacy. Certain people, some of us, have been blessed by affirmative action to be able to take advantage of opportunities. But I also believe that racial discrimination, and in many ways, we are experiencing a backlash. I think that there have been times that we are seeing the mobilization and the intensifying of racial discrimination and white supremacy and white privilege in this country. How well I remember my days at the seminary, when I would often talk and share with some of the research interns at the research center. And I remember them sharing me many times when they would be studying what they would perceive to be the future of the denominations. And we know that Harvard Seminary was on the cutting edge of forecasting the decline of mainline religion back in the day. When they were studying, one of the things that my colleagues would say to me from the research centers, they would say, you need to know, Barbara, that there's coming a day where it's going to be the coloring of denominations, the browning of denominations. And indeed, for many denominations, such as the American Baptists and other denominations, United Methodist, there have been declined, but where they are being held up is by the participation of Black participation in Black churches. And I believe that signals something to me, because I realized it was coming from the statistics and the demographics that at one point in the latter part of the 20th century, white Americans would no longer be the majority in this land. And I began to think to myself, how would a people who are so used to privilege and power handle a shifting of demographics by which they are no longer the dominant people? And I began to wonder what that would look like. I think we're seeing very clearly what it looks like. I think we need to understand that there has been a backlash against, in the past 25, 30 years, a backlash to any kind of advancements that African Americans have been able to acquire by hard work. And we've been seeing a pitting of white people, persons who are also economically depressed against African Americans and any immigrants. And there has been a manipulation, a backlash, a pushback against any type of progress. I think many times when I look back at the successful presidency of President Obama, I remember many people thinking that, oh, we have arrived. We have a Black president. And I heard many people say racism is over. And I'm saying to myself, they really don't understand the nature of the beast called racism in America. And we began to see that the fact that President Obama was in place, that was the epitome for many people in this country, that they could no longer tolerate the cruelty and the kinds of things that were put upon him during his presidency with signs. So there's a fear, and that fear, I believe, leads to unholy alliances. I think one of the things that we definitely have to acknowledge, and I think Brother Dr. Johnson said it well too, the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s was uniquely and beautifully rainbow, a menagerie of different persons coming together, Jews and Gentiles and Blacks and whites and gays, and coming together to fight this fight together. And there were also white clergy that were walking and marching. But what we're seeing and what's evident today, that is also part of the backlash and the fear of a true multiracial, multicultural democracy, is that our brothers in the white evangelicals persuasion have made an unholy alliance with principles and persons who so apparently to us are so opposite of what we believe the Christian message is about. And so so much is being revealed through this time, this pandemic. I often tell people we were shocked when we had to go into this pandemic. We were flawed. We don't know how not to have church in the Black church tradition in particular. But I believe, just like that opening statement of A Tale of Two Cities, it was the worst of times and it was the best of times. I have seen God move in ways that would not have happened had we not been in a pandemic. When we had to see and witness some of the cruelty and the injustices that we have seen. For some of us, it was not a surprise to see the murders and the police brutality and to have it captured on camera. Those of us in the African American community have been for years telling people they are brutalizing us. They are killing our sons and our daughters. But it wasn't until people were stuck into their homes and had to see repeatedly over and over again George Floyd's life snuffed out as a man who callously and coolly held his knee on the neck of a man until he died. And then there was shock and uproar. And so we need to understand that the dream for many people, some of us were able to capture a piece of the dream. But for the majority of minorities in this country, the dream has become a nightmare. And a nightmare that we need to wake up from and begin to utilize ways in which we can expand it. Dr. King's dream has vitality, but it now it's going to be stretched. It's being stretched, it's being pulled to be the fullness of understanding what true liberation and justice for all people are. There are generations right now, one of the things that I am marveling at, and it's the generations that are existing now, the millennials and the Gen X's and all of them, they are coming to this task with a zeal and a determination that forces those of us who have been in this struggle for a while to take notice. It's not going to be the way it was in the civil rights. I think the marching, definitely, the push, the political awareness, the canvassing, the getting out the vote, all of that. We are seeing a generation that is more equipped, more prepared intellectually, theologically. They are the ones who they were fed the milk from the beginning of their theological awareness. They grew up on what we were calling the emergent theologies of our day, womanist theology, liberation theology. They came in, that's what they've always known, just like people have always known computers. So they come in with a critique and a capacity for critical analysis that forces them to not tolerate. There's a hunger and a rage, and a holy rage, if I would say, that's pushing them to do things in ways that are challenging. And so I see, for us, particularly the Black church, is at a crossroads. How do we engage? What part do we play? Because what is trying to perpetuate the dream today in movements such as the Black Lives Movement, they have done that without the leadership, the traditional leadership of the Black church. In fact, they were very suspicious of leadership of the Black church. And for those of us who think we have to go through traditional channels through which to establish leadership, that's not how our young people are dealing this. They're dealing with crowd leadership. They're dealing with your title doesn't mean a thing to them. They want to know, are you fighting? What are you out there in the front lines? And so for many of the people many leaders in the Black church, pastors in particular, we have difficulty having that because you know what? They don't really need us. And they do need us. But we need to come to that relationship with them in a very different way. Not as I'm in charge because I'm Dr. Reverend somebody or somebody's pastor. No, there's a level playing field with the young people. They need our wisdom. They need our support. They need us to encourage them. But we also need their zeal and their strength and their capacity to think of doing things a new way and their determination not to be turned around. And so, yes, as we look at the dream to me is expanding. As I think intuitively Dr. King would have done. He was on the brink of doing that, expanding the dream. He was realizing it's more than just Blacks being able to sit on a bus. He began to realize the political implications of what capitalism and the expand of the American empire would bring in this world. And I think that was why he was on his way, and he had to be eliminated by the thoughts on the understanding of those who oppose true liberation and democracy in the world. And so as I look at the dream and begin to think about my hopes for it. My desire is to equip people in my church and myself to come alongside persons and to understand that struggle today is so deep because we have to understand the trauma also that we as a people have dealt with, um, to what our children are dealing with and what they have continued to deal with is so deep because our communities and our families have deteriorated in such ways that some of the strength we had when Dr. King spoke those words about his dream have dissipated. And so, how do we rebuild the community? How do we rebuild the village implications of that? And then lastly, I would say this, that as we seek and persons, our white colleagues and comrades who are working and desiring to come alongside and to help us to visualize and make material the dream, it's very important that they also search out their own biases, as Dr. Johnson has said, their own biases, and understand their participation in white privilege. I've lived long enough and I've worked enough with colleagues of different persuasions to know that even the best of our colleagues do not understand, our white colleagues do not understand their own implicit racism. They are our benefactors in many respects, but they do not even understand the depth of it. And so it is a conversation that has to go on with them. And I don't think that as an African American or African Americans, we should be saddled with that responsibility. That's a responsibility that whites need to have with other whites. White clergy with white clergy, white congregations with white congregations. They need to talk about, they need to explore how they participate and benefit from the things that have been oppressing so many people in this world. And so the dream to me expands. It's a difficult time, but it's also a time, it's a crossroads time. It's a Kairos moment right now that we have to move forward or we are going to fall back so much. And just in reference, because it has been referenced, January 6th, that to me, that was no surprise to me. I did not possibly think it was going to happen that way, but I think in my heart, I've always known there has been a building up of resentment with lies and untruth. So what happened there was not to me a last gasp, but that's the first shot being shown, blown across the bow to let us know there are persons in this country who are willing to kill, destroy, and are well equipped to do that, to stop this march. But thanks be to God, when you see the kinds of work that was accomplished this past election, we can do this. We can do this. It's not going to be easy, but we can do this. And so the dream can still live if we continue to push on for the real fullness of liberation and justice for all.
Thank you so much. Excellent, excellent work. Excellent work. I don't know if MT wanted to say anything before we go into questions. If she wanted to go ahead, MT. This is Dr. MT Winter, who is the head of the WLI Center and who is a teacher par excellence. She has more years at Hartford Seminary, is the leading historian of that place, and is the keeper of the dream for us and our spirituality. So Dr. MT Winter, jump in here.
Fools rush in where angels fear to tread. It doesn't get any whiter than this. But deep in my soul, my body, my spirit, from little girlhood on, for some reason I cannot comprehend, I've had a deep love for Black peoples. It brought me to Africa, throughout Africa, and brought me to actually dare to stand up in that Black ministries program and teach worship to Black people. Are you crazy, MT Winter? And I had to say, lock the door so nobody leaves. Listen to what I'm going to say. And if you want to leave after I'm done, go, or I'll go. There were about 80 people in that first class. And I said, I'm not crazy enough to think I'm going to teach you about worship. I'm going to try to connect you to the energies of your ancestors in Africa, to the core of what they felt, where they find the sacredness in the worlds they inhabit. Even though the various nations and villages and tribes and peoples differ, there's something at the core that gets it, and they don't need artifices to get them to it. And so what I did was I said, I'm not teaching you anything about worship, but I'm going to teach you the meaning of liturgy, liturgia, which and that this course was on sacred the liturgy and prayer, right? And connect you to the ancient Greeks' understanding of liturgia, liturgy, which was when something happens of a blessing or a benefit for the peoples of a particular time in ancient Greece. The pharaoh, the one in charge, gave a blessing of thanks to the gods, and what was required of him was to do something of meaning for the people. So often he would have a well dug, or they would pave a road, or they would give acres to plant for plantings and all. So I tried to make that connection of when Paul the apostle used the word, my liturgia, my liturgy, my liturgia, was to preach Jesus to the Gentiles. It wasn't so much preaching Christianity, but was that sense of giving thanks to the divine for blessings, and that you had the responsibility to do something of blessing equally for another. Do shopping for another during a time of COVID panic. Go out there and mow somebody's lawn. Help a person to make it to a church if that is not, whatever. Take them, do something for someone other. That is the core liturgia. And one of my deepest joys was in the midst of that course, someone had taken me to a bar to hear a Black, wonderful soul singer whom I knew. And across the bar room, it was filled with people. One of my students shouted out, Dr. Winter, I am living my liturgy. I am here living my liturgy, my liturgia. I am doing something for someone else. Well, that's the fulfillment for me, all over and out. So what I want to say here was, I just had this insight about the word dream. I said, I have a dream, we have a dream. And I want to give another perspective to that. Brother, soul friend, Ben, is an expert on interpreting dreams. We've talked this through the years. We've done this. I think it's time to do an exegetical examination and a spiritual, whatever, examination of that word dream. What does dreaming now? And so much of what Ben understands and knows, and I have experienced, is when you fall asleep and you dream, that's where the work of the subconscious helps the strategies to kind of arise, or the commitments and convictions to rise. You may not get the answers, but you have a sense of something more needs to be done. And I'm at the ready to do it, standing by for marching orders or finding a way to grow in that. And so I think at this time, something Hartford Seminary might be able to offer meaningfully to speak to this Black Lives Mattering, and I have a dream, is that we do some sessions, Ben, can I say this? That you do some sessions, and I'll support you on dream interpretation and analysis. And we talk about this, and we relate it to the dream, the bigger dream of those of us here in our nation, in our communities, in our world, on our planet, at this time in history. What is that dream? And how can that dream be fulfilled in ways perhaps at this moment we cannot comprehend? But the love and desire and passion in our hearts will be taken up by the Holy Spirit, and we will find the ways and means to at least make some kind of difference in the times in which we live.
So beautifully articulated, and I think that's the next step for BMP, and as we're progressing on to the new center that will prayerfully be announced in the next month still coming, to think about in context with the dream of these young people who are on the street, this rainbow coalition of all peoples and all genders and all faculties coming out here together to make a difference, and to see how do we ground their work, how do we help to support their work. I love the phrasing that that Dr. Headley used. How do we walk alongside of them? We don't have to take their work or take the rod out of their hands, but they do need us to stand with them, to give shape and thought to some of their energy. And I think that training a new clergy, a new laity for this new work is going to be where we need to be at. That's what we can do as a seminary. Can we help to get leaders who may be stuck in an old liturgy to see a new liturgy, who are stuck holding on to the old dream and the old way in which to get at it, to see these new opportunities? The progressive way in which an Alvan Johnson speaks is completely different. The thought of an interreligious, interfaith kind of a grouping is different from the sort of parochialism that often happens, the pulling in that happens. I think the next step has to be to widen the net, but to widen the net, it has to be done with complete respect and honor for the other, and a belief that this is what needs to happen to make the world a better place.
Dan, can I just say something too, in light of what you just said? This is where, in many respects, Harvard Seminary has been on the cutting edge and radically doing things before its time. And years ago, when lay ministry was an emphasis, it was radically like, okay, why are you in seminary if you're not going to be ordained and become a pastor? But the seminary lifted up that there are many different callings to the manifestation of following the teachings of Christ. And what we see today is a group of persons who are coalescing together, who are not seeking for the traditional titles. They're forming new organizations. They're forming new religious gatherings. And the seminary has always been on the forefront of that. And that I've always commended them about, radically on the forefront of lifting up non-traditional ways of leading for social and justice things. And again, just as with Islamic issues, the seminary's time has come in many respects.
Amen. Amen. I want to do, and I see you in the chat, and I do think MT is right. We will work towards thinking about another course on dreams, and I think it'll be an interesting course as we move forward, as long as I can get her to commit. So we'll talk about that really soon. I think that a couple of the questions that have come up, and I think I know the answer. Let's start first with there has been a loss of people from the Black church, and what do you think is happening? And I think that loss is in the millennial area, particularly over their ideas about social justice and about life in general, not accepting some of the fundamentalist ideas of some of the church. So anyone want to speak to that? That's from Calvin.
I think just in terms, because I'm actively in the pastorate and have seen over the past 20 years a loss of the younger generation. I think once they go to college, you don't see them coming back into the church setting. There are several reasons for that. But one of the things that are most hopeful that I learned when I the parents of the congregation I serve presently were concerned that their teenagers, their older teenagers and their young adults did not come back. They were so active in the church, which is a story for many congregations. And I had a suspicion about that. In fact, they had not been active since I had been there. I met with them. I held a lunch for them, a formal invitation. I held a lunch to sit down and talk with them on a Sunday afternoon. They came to the luncheon, didn't come to the service, but came to the luncheon. And that was fine. And I said, I just want to talk to me. I have no hidden agenda here. What's up? And they really said, let me just summarize it. They may have left the church, but they didn't leave God. And many of them found the traditional ways in which the church has operated stifling for them. They felt that they could not express their dreams, their things that they wanted to do, their leadership. And in many respects, that's kind of true in some circumstances. We've come up with the tradition, particularly in African American church, you got to come up through the ranks. Our young people come out equipped, and they're like, I have an idea. Why can't I do that? And so there are several reasons why that. And one of the things that I've also found is that they're not really so much against some church as we know it, but they are deeply spiritual and they want space. They want to experience space where they can experience the holy. They know some of the tradition of being a Black, which we have seen in the recent PBS special, The Black Church. But they want to know, what are you doing? I sat down with about 25 of those young adults and those in college, and they said, Pastor Headley, if y'all get in the streets, we're going to be there with you. If you want to reach young people, if y'all start to do something, we'll be there with you. And that was the challenge. They're willing to do, but they want the witness, their witness they want to see out of our lives in the church. What are you doing? Are you just talking on the inside, or are you doing it on the outside?
Dr. Johnson, do you want to add anything to that?
I did. There are two things that we need to share, and that is that all well, and that would be a third thing, but all churches are declining, not just the Black church. They're all in decline. But one of the main things in the United States of America, and we have to take a very hard look at it in the Black community, that decline, a part of the problem of that decline is the status of the human family. The family is under attack and from several sectors, and when the family is eroding, and that was how the Christian church really grew, expanded, because families would bring their family members. So that if we are going to have to work hard at restructuring the human family. We're looking at mass incarceration, huge numbers of our young people in prison, an inordinate amount. And I think today they're talking about legalizing marijuana and then making it retroactive to decriminalize it. But I think that we need to take a good hard look to restructure and revitalize the human family. And then one of the things that I see as hopeful that has come as an outcome of the pandemic is that through these Zooms, that the churches, maybe they're not growing physically, but they are expanding. I'm sure Dr. Headley, when she goes, you're on Zoom, that she reaches all the way to California and so the church is expanding that way, and that again forebodes for the future. We have to take a look at that too. So that will help us to grow and to reach a goodly number of people. And one other thing that Dr. Headley said that I really do appreciate, the people, I mean, and I'm not going to expand on it, but young people and then mature adults are disenchanted when people seek the title, but they don't embrace the work.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Definitely.
That's true.
Let me shift this conversation um, a little bit towards some of the questions that are coming up. Gail Kinney asked a wonderful question, and she was talking about how we will build these coalitions, and we want people to work together in commitment, and particularly across racial line. Well, the churches, and her question is, how can that happen in Protestantism when the radical right evangelicals does not seem to believe in justice, particularly not racial justice or immigrant justice? How do we work that through? As a side note to that, some of you might be aware that the Southern Baptist Seminary presidents have come out with a letter and an edict that has nixed critical race theory as a part of any teachings within Southern Baptist seminaries, so that some of the issues related to the legacy of racism and the long-term effects of racial policies have been removed from the dialogue in their seminaries, so that their seminarians, new pastors coming out, will not even be taught to even think in terms of the fact that there has been a nation that has treated some of its citizens as second class. So her question is, how do we work across those lines, or what do we do?
If I may, I think in order to work across those lines, we have to acknowledge that the persons who will come to make that cross have to be at a certain point in their own critical thinking, and that in order to do that, there's dialogue that has to be done together, and as I said before, separate. The fact that those seminary presidents of the Southern Baptist, primarily Southern Baptist seminaries, could do that is a denial of. I think they will teach, the oppression of people, and we need to love one another because God is love. But the progression of that thought and that critical process has to bring you to a point where you begin to look beyond the surface of that and begin to get underneath. And that's uncomfortable. That means that we have to have some ownership and partnership in the conditions that are existing right now. And and I don't think that's done easy. I think for a lot of white Christians, white evangelicals in particular, that's down a corridor that is too frightening to really embrace. And we need to do that. We need to do that in order to be in dialogue honestly with each other. But let me just say this too. This is not to say that in particular the Afro Black Church is void of any issues that they need to deal with. Sexism, the classism, the homophobia, there's stuff still that we need to deal with. So there is a lot of repentance that needs to be done, self-examination, and this is a perfect time to be talking about that during Lent. Um, but the process of being honest and upfront is in order to have to come together. Um, it's it just can't simply be holding hands, singing "We Shall Overcome," "Kumbaya." It's deeper than that. It's a wound that's so deep on both sides. Only the brave will be able to really do that.
Dr. Johnson?
Well, I'm just I would really raise the question. We take a look at the one scripture that says, "Whosoever will, let them come." If their heart is not in a pursuit of justice, how can we possibly coalesce with them? That reminds me of the same argument between James Hal Cone and and J.D. Otis Roberts, that we're looking at reconciliation. Well, Cone said reconciliation cannot happen without liberation. And anyone that stands in or juxtaposed to liberation, it's very difficult to coalesce with them. And I'm saying I don't know if that is where we need to spend our time and our energy, coalescing with people that are opposed to the liberation struggle. I don't know. We just have to find whosoever will, whoever wants to pursue justice, and let's work together. Now, that will cross racial lines, that will cross gender and all kinds of barriers. More people will come around the principle of justice. But I just don't see. You have to pray for me, and then yes, we are, and then you have to pray for me. I just have a hard time imagining me coalescing with a Ku Klux Klansman that very well may be out to kill me. That I've got to, but then miracles happen. But I'm just simply saying I'd much rather spend time developing and recruiting allies than to try to convince people whose minds are already distorted.
I think that one of the things that we have realized, there are a lot of people of goodwill, and this question came up earlier, and I said we'd come back to it. People are asking now, how do we become anti-racist? And I think it's an important question to ask, because, to not be racist yourself is one thing, but to be an abolitionist is another thing. Is to be one that I'm going to work towards the abolishment of something. I'm going to work to make this world specifically better for this specific group of people. And I think people now have not had sort of that abolitionist type mindset, because they did not really understand what to work towards or against. And many never understood their privilege. Some people never even recognized their privilege. It was just the way they grew up. Forgive them for that not knowing, but they didn't. So how do we help them to join the struggle? There are many people living in suburbia right now saying, how do I help? What do I do to become anti-racist? And I'm not just talking about anti-racism as in not disliking or taking up the cause of African Americans, but I'm talking about the same thing with Asians who are now being blamed for the coronavirus that they had nothing to do with and maimed on the street. I'm talking about gays and lesbians who are being beaten and whooped. And I'm talking about anti-everything. How do I become anti that which is injustice and pro-justice? Go ahead, Amy.
And I think I would say that it is very difficult to have been born and raised in America and not have some level of bias or racism that we're not even aware of, the unconscious kind of it. And I think why we can intentionally educate ourselves to deconstruct the racist beliefs that we don't even know that we have, and we need to work at that actively. But I think the greatest hope is in the generations that are coming. I think the younger generations have less barriers than we put up. The number of mixed marriages, the number of children who grew up in diversity, in many places where their parents were intentional about it, they come with a different lens. Our hope is in them. We have to unlearn so much. We have to constantly be aware of our unconscious bias. our work needs to be put into the generation that are coming behind us, the ones who, because of technology, are exposed to so much more culture and beliefs of other people and come to respect it. They are the hope of being non-racist. They are the hope of that. I think I watch my own nephews and such in my family who married Caucasians, and I was like, "Are you kidding me?" But I'm like, Barb, what's the big deal? And I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. What's the big deal? And having to learn that for them, so it's the younger generations, I think, and we have to work very hard and at not being racist. Because even Black people, because of coming up in America, have racist ideology about other people as well.
Martin Luther King said that the rhetoric and the language, the verbiage of the opposition is deafening. It is cacophony, but it's the silence of our allies that is deafening. That is to say, it's not just enough to say that you are not a racist. To be anti-racist, you must act. You Joshi says that it's like being on a conveyor belt and you're just riding along and going along and using the language. But when you become anti-racist, you get off of the conveyor belt and you work. Now, the Unitarian Universalists have had a corner on this thought. If you really want to be anti-racist, then you need to follow the leadership of Black people. And listen as they articulate. Just listen and learn and grow. A lot of liberals want to be seen as anti-racist, but they want to control. And I'm sorry, you have to first understand how you benefit from white privilege. And I think Dr. Barbara said, you have to identify your benefit, how you benefit from white privilege, and begin to reject that, and or at least make sure that other people have the same benefits that you do. If you work towards that, then that's anti-racism. But the bottom line is, it's no longer verbiage in speaking. You must act and work together with oppressed people who understand the problem far better than you do, so that they can help you. How are you going to be anti-racist, but you don't know any Black people?
Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. We could keep going on and on and on. MT, is anything you want to say in closing? I know
That's what a privilege it has been for me personally to be here this evening in the presence of the three of you, in the presence of the Holy Spirit, the divine Spirit, speaking to and through you, and extending out through all of those who I know are out there, whose energies are one with our energies. We're living in a time of quantum energy, which means we've connected this energy with more people this evening, the three of you, than we realize. What you've said, how you've led us to think, how you've shared your experiences have opened, I'm sure, a lot of channels so that we can go forward a little bit more collectively and creatively and definitively into the future. Thank you for the blessing you have been to all of them, to all of those who are here with us tonight, and especially to me. Thank you.
MT, as always, you're beloved by all and by many of the attendees in the room as well. We just grateful for you and grateful for your wonderful wisdom in all things. Dr. Headley, Dr. Johnson, you both have done a tremendous job and a tremendous service to this community and sharing with us. And I want to appreciate you and appreciatively applaud you for your wonderful, articulate way in which you've shared with this community. This has been a great dialogue. We will pick it up again. I'm excited about what we've started in this moment. We said we were going to close out and a few moments ago, so we are going to close out pretty much on time. And it's been a great time. There's a number of thank you so muches in there and a number of blessings in the chat that are coming your way. People have enjoyed it. I have enjoyed it. I think we've made a mark that can't be erased. This has been a great dialogue, and I hope that we will keep this dialogue going. Again, on behalf of Harvard Seminary, Dr. M.T. Winter, my colleague and friend, and all of the good people that helped to put this together. I cannot forget Susan, who does so much work in the background. Yes. If you only knew how much she does. And Stephen, thank you again for your technical support. We appreciate all of you, and thank you for joining us tonight. And I pray that you go forth and have a great and prosperous week. And I pray something we've said tonight will be helpful in the future. There's Susan's beautiful face popped on the screen. Amen. Thank you so much again. And so I will say to you tonight, I'll say shalom, salam, and namaste. Go in peace.
Thank you.
Thank you.